Welcome to ofEmpowerMigra. Here we look at studies on migration without the fluff. In every deep dive, we ask a simple question. What is actually true? And what is just constantly claimed?
Right. And to answer that question today, we're relying strictly on empirical data.
Yeah.
We're looking at a pretty comprehensive structural study that, cuts through all the societal noise.
The opinions, the politics, all of it.
Exactly. We're getting straight to the facts about integration and the labor market. Our mission here is to look at the systems in place, analyze their mechanics, and basically see how they actually function in reality.
Right, rather than how they're just assumed to function in theory.
Exactly.
So, to start us off, I want you to imagine a very specific scenario. So just picture this. Imagine you are a lead structural engineer.
Okay.
You've studied for years at top universities. You've got, decades of practical experience. You've literally built bridges.
Right.
You've managed massive construction projects.
Yeah.
And you have the drive to keep doing exactly that. But today, you're sitting across a desk from a government caseworker. They're looking at your resume, and they're telling you that your only viable option, is to go pick strawberries in an agricultural field.
Wow. Yeah.
And furthermore, if you refuse this strawberry picking job because, you want to work in engineering, you will be officially labeled as a stubborn burden on the state.
It's crazy.
It is. Now, honestly, if this happened to you, would you say it's your own fault?
Right?
Or would you start to question the system? Because, think about it. If you go to a doctor with a visibly broken arm and the doctor's x-ray machine shows a perfectly healthy bone, you don't blame your arm.
No, of course not.
You check the machine taking the picture.
Exactly.
So today we're looking at a societal x-ray machine that might just be fundamentally miscalibrated.
That metaphor it's highly relevant to what we're examining today. Because when we talk about migration and the labor market, there is this very persistent, widespread societal narrative.
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere.
Right. It's almost a default setting in public discourse. And the narrative is basically this: migrants are ultimately to blame if they don't have good jobs.
Yeah. The assumption you hear repeated over and over.
Exactly. In casual conversation, in the media, even within bureaucratic institutions, it's always this idea that unemployment or underemployment is due to a lack of effort.
Right, or a lack of performance.
Yeah, inadequate qualifications, or just a fundamental refusal to integrate into society.
Okay, let's unpack this because let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
We live in a society that prides itself on being a meritocracy, right?
Sure.
The general belief is that if you work hard, if you have the right skills, the market is going to reward you. It's just basic supply and demand.
Right, that's the theory.
So the natural assumption people make is that if a specific group is, failing to integrate into the workforce, they must be missing one of those key ingredients.
Right, they assume it's a personal deficit.
Yeah. They either don't have the skills or they just aren't putting in the work.
But that is precisely the premise we are testing today. What happens when we look at a group of people who check every single box for high qualifications?
A high motivation.
Exactly. People who did everything right, quote unquote.
Yeah.
If that societal narrative holds up, these people should be seamlessly integrating into the top tiers of the workforce.
They aren't.
No. And if the data shows they are systematically failing to secure employment that actually matches their skills, then that whole meritocratic assumption fractures.
It totally falls apart.
And then we're forced to ask some really hard questions about the institutional structures they're trying to navigate.
Which brings us to the data. We are diving into a really detailed empirical study by Sabine Gruber and Harold Rüssler.
Yes.
It's titled Highly Qualified and Unemployed, or in German, hochqualifiziert und arbeitslos.
Right.
And this study focuses on a very specific demographic. Jewish quota refugees, known as contingent Flüchtlinge, who migrated from the former Soviet Union to North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany.
And to understand why this specific group is basically the perfect empirical test for that lack of effort narrative, we need to look at the historical context.
Right.
The demographics that the researchers provide.
Exactly. Because this isn't just a random sampling of immigrants. This group's arrival in Germany is tied to a really specific set of historical circumstances.
Yeah, let's establish that context. How did this specific migration pathway actually open up?
Well, it goes back to the geopolitical shifts of the late 80s and early 90s.
With the Soviet Union falling apart.
Right. With perestroika and glasnost, the Soviet Union began to open up, and they finally allowed Soviet Jews to leave the country without those severe discriminatory restrictions that had trapped them before.
And initially, most of them didn't go to Germany, right?
No, the vast majority went to the U.S. or Israel.
Hmm.
But as the U.S. began to reduce its intake quotas, and Israel was facing, regional conflicts and the sheer economic challenge of absorbing so many people at once,
They needed alternative destinations.
and this is where German policy comes into play, starting with East Germany, actually.
Yes, which is a really interesting detail. In the summer of 1990, the very last democratically elected government of the DDR East Germany passed a resolution offering these Soviet Jewish immigrants a right to stay.
Wow.
It was a profound historical gesture, acknowledging German historical responsibility in the context of the Holocaust.
Right.
And then following reunification in 1991, the federal and state governments of the newly unified Germany adopted this stance. Germany officially became an immigration country for Jews from the former Soviet Union.
Granting them permanent residency rights upon arrival.
Exactly.
And that legal status, that is a crucial variable in this study.
Absolutely.
Because we aren't talking about asylum seekers who are legally barred from working while their applications are being processed for years.
Right. No waiting period.
These individuals arrived with secure legal status. They were allowed to work immediately. So that legal barrier to entry that so many migrants face, it was practically non-existent here.
Correct. And then we really have to look at the demographic profile of the people who actually arrived. The researchers are extremely clear on this point.
Oh yeah, the numbers are wild.
Right. In the Soviet Union, the Jewish population was widely considered the most educated, mobile, and urban demographic group.
Yeah.
Because of historical marginalization in certain sectors, there had been this massive cultural and familial push toward high-level academic achievement.
Right, to compensate.
Exactly, particularly in the hard sciences, engineering, and medicine.
And like I said, the numbers in the study are staggering. When Gruber and Rusler look at the specific sample in cities like Dortmund and Dusseldorf, they found that over half, and in some specific municipal areas, nearly 2/3 of this demographic hold academic degrees.
2/3. It's incredible.
We're talking about highly specialized engineers, IT specialists, medical doctors, research scientists, economists, university-level pedagogues.
And it's also vital to highlight the gender parity within that workforce.
Right. Totally different from the West at the time.
Yeah. The researchers note a very high female employment rate prior to migration. It was a hallmark of the Soviet economic system. Both men and women were employed at roughly the same ratio.
With the men dominating heavy industry and technical fields, mostly.
Yes, and the women representing the vast majority in medical, pedagogical, and economic professions. Before their immigration, over 55% of these individuals were actively employed in their specialized fields.
And the rest were basically kids or retirees.
Exactly. Or university students.
So let's synthesize what we have here. We have a demographic group arriving in Germany with permanent, secure residency.
Right.
They possess vast professional experience. They have equal gender representation in the professional workforce. And they bring with them massive advanced academic achievements.
Massive.
I mean, the study literally refers to them as having a green card level of potential.
Yes.
In any industrialized, knowledge-based economy that constantly warns about a shortage of skilled labor, which Germany definitely does, this group should be treated like an absolute gold mine.
They should. Companies should be fighting over them.
Exactly.
But that is the logical, meritocratic expectation. The empirical reality, documented in the study, is a profound paradox.
Yeah.
Despite these massive qualifications, this demographic faces disproportionately high unemployment. And perhaps even more concerning, those who do manage to find work are overwhelmingly employed in jobs drastically below their skill level.
And this is the core phenomenon the researchers call Qualifizierung deskilling.
Yes.
Deskilling.
And just to be clear for you listening, this isn't just someone with a master's degree taking a slightly lower level management job.
No, not at all.
This is a complete professional freefall.
Precisely. You have a highly industrialized society that desperately needs skilled labor, particularly in engineering, healthcare, and IT. And yet, you have this immense pool of talent experiencing severe deskilling.
Yeah.
The study meticulously outlines why this is happening. And the findings point squarely away from individual failure.
The data doesn't show a group of people who are lazy or incapable. Not at all. It points directly toward systemic and institutional friction.
Okay, let's dive into that fiction. Where is the first wall they hit? Because logic dictates that if you are a mechanical engineer, you just, apply for a mechanical engineering job. Why doesn't that work?
Well, the first and often most insurmountable wall is the bureaucratic machinery of degree recognition.
Oof, the paperwork.
Yeah. Having a foreign academic achievement acknowledged in Germany is notoriously complex, it's opaque, and it's incredibly rigid.
But wait, science is science, right? I mean, math is math. A bridge built by a Soviet-trained engineer uses the exact same physics as a bridge built by a German-trained engineer. So why is the recognition so difficult?
Because the German system doesn't just evaluate the raw knowledge, it evaluates the exact bureaucratic equivalence of the study program.
Oh, like checking boxes.
Exactly. Did your university program have the exact same number of hours in this specific subdiscipline as the German equivalent? Was the institutional structure identical?
Which it obviously never is.
Right. So many of these immigrants find that the degrees they spent years earning and the professional titles they held for decades are simply not recognized as equivalent to German university degrees.
That's devastating.
It is. In some cases, they are downgraded to technical college levels, and in many cases, they aren't recognized at all.
So with a single bureaucratic stamp, or I guess the lack of a stamp, their entire professional identity is wiped out.
Gone.
In the eyes of the German labor market, they are instantly stripped of their expertise. Legally, they're forced to represent themselves to employers as unskilled or semi-skilled labor, which completely contradicts what they can actually do.
Exactly. And once their degrees are invalidated on paper, they face an immediate existential crisis.
Right, because they need to survive. They need income.
Yes. And since they cannot access the high-paying jobs they are actually qualified for, they are pushed into the social welfare system. They end up at the welfare office.
And that is where the second, much more aggressive structural trap spring.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's examine the sociolopt. Because again, playing devil's advocate here, the welfare system is funded by taxpayers.
Right.
The overarching philosophy is work instead of welfare, getting people off public assistance as quickly as possible. So from a purely fiscal standpoint, isn't it a caseworker's duty to stop the outflow of taxpayer money immediately?
On a micro level, sure. If you're looking strictly at this month's municipal budget, that logic holds. But the study reveals how this short-term, month-to-month bureaucratic logic completely sabotages long-term economic integration.
How so?
Well, the primary metric for success for a welfare caseworker is simply whether a file can be closed.
Oh, wow. Just a binary yes or no.
It is a binary system. Is the person receiving money or are they not? The quality, the sustainability, or the economic potential of the employment they are pushed into, that is largely irrelevant to the caseworker's performance metrics.
So the system is entirely focused on the immediate present. It lacks any mechanism for calculating long-term return on investment ROI.
Precisely. The welfare office isn't looking at a 45-year-old structural engineer and running a 10-year economic projection.
They aren't saying, hey, if we invest in a 6-month, highly specialized language course and a targeted software certification, this person will re-enter the engineering field.
Right. And they'll pay taxes in the highest bracket for the next 2 decades and generate massive economic value. They don't do that.
Yeah.
Instead, the institutional mandate forces the caseworker to say, look, we have an open position for a shelf stacker at a logistics warehouse right now. Take it so we can remove you from the welfare rolls next month.
It's like using a state-of-the-art smartphone to hammer a nail.
That's a great way to put it.
I mean, you aren't just misusing a valuable tool, you're actively destroying it.
Yes, you are breaking the phone. And the study provides specific, frankly jarring anecdotes to illustrate this misallocation of human capital. Let's talk about the pianist.
Oh, this one is unbelievable.
It really is. The researchers documented the case of a highly trained concert pianist. The welfare office sent this individual to work in a carpentry shop.
It's almost absurd. It's not just that they aren't utilizing the person's skills, they are placing them in an environment that actively threatens their core competency.
Right, the physical danger.
A pianist's hands are their livelihood. It's their instrument. Placing them in heavy manual labor with machinery is risking permanent destruction of their professional potential. And all just to save a few weeks of welfare payments.
Exactly. Another case documented is a civil engineer, highly trained in complex construction projects. The welfare agency directed him to take a job in agriculture as a field laborer.
A field laborer?
Yes. And when the immigrant protested, pointing out his advanced engineering qualifications and his desire to work in his field, the response from the bureaucracy was essentially indifference.
Oh, they just didn't care.
The machine saw a vacancy in agriculture, and it saw an unemployed body receiving benefits. That was the entirety of the matching process.
Let's go even deeper into this bureaucratic mindset. I want to unpack the story of Herr Yu.
Ah, yes, how are you?
Because this specific case study from Gruber and Rusler feels like the perfect encapsulation of the entire systemic failure. Who is Herr Yu?
So Herr Yu is a mathematics and IT teacher who arrived in Germany in late 1997. He had a really strong background in computer science, and recognizing the demands of the German labor market, he didn't just ask for a job.
Right.
He actively researched what the market needed. He identified a retraining course to become an applications developer for commercial systems. Specifically, he wanted to get certified in SAP software.
Which is brilliant. I mean, SAP experts are notoriously in high demand. It's a highly lucrative field. He is basically offering the state a guaranteed pathway to turn him into a high-income taxpayer.
Exactly. So he applied to the Sozialamt to continue receiving basic welfare support just for the duration of this specific retraining course.
Yeah.
But his application was flatly rejected.
Why? I mean, if the goal of the state is a strong economy, why block someone from acquiring the exact skills the economy is begging for?
It comes down to that rigid legal hierarchy of the welfare mandate we discussed. A caseworker explicitly explained the institutional reasoning to the researchers.
What did they say?
They stated that if there is an educational measure for highly qualified people, the welfare provider's first instinct is to question if it is legally their job to fund it.
Oh my God. Passing the buck.
The governing principle is reasonableness. If it is deemed reasonable for the person to just take a normal activity, and in bureaucratic terms, normal usually means an immediately available, unskilled job, then they must take it.
So they would rather he take a minimum wage job immediately than support him for a few months to get a job that pays 3 times as much.
The caseworker was remarkably candid about this. They stated on the record that if the agency has the opportunity to place someone in a warehouse job and make them independent of welfare today, the agency will choose that path with the highest probability. They will enforce that immediate placement even if there is a higher qualification measure available that would lead to a vastly superior long-term outcome. The system's rules are blind to potential. They only see immediate cost.
So what happened to Herr Yu? Did he end up in the warehouse?
He fought back, but it required an immense disproportionate effort. He eventually got into the SAP program, but only a full year later.
A whole year wasted.
And the only reason he succeeded was because his father-in-law happened to be a former lawyer who knew how to aggressively combat the bureaucracy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he had to use legal force, file appeals, and basically fight the very state apparatus that is ostensibly designed to integrate him just to be allowed to become a highly skilled professional.
The paradox here is staggering. The data shows that the system's own metrics for success, which is immediate removal from welfare, are precisely what guarantee long-term economic failure for both the migrant and the state.
Exactly.
The structures in place are not designed to identify, preserve, and utilize existing human capital. They function more like an industrial shredder.
Processing cases as cheaply and quickly as possible.
Yeah, completely, regardless of the destruction of specialized skills.
Which brings us to the psychological and sociological core of the study. How does the system justify this?
Right.
When highly qualified migrants resist this de-skilling process, how does the bureaucracy react?
Because if an engineer is told to pick strawberries, and they say, no, I am an engineer, I need to find engineering work, they're demonstrating an attachment to their professional identity.
Yes.
You're trying to preserve their value.
But the bureaucratic system doesn't view that resistance as a rational economic decision. What's fascinating here is how the narrative is weaponized.
Here we go.
The narrative. The text reveals that welfare and employment agencies consistently label these highly qualified migrants as stubborn, obstinate, or as having unrealistic expectations.
Unrealistic expectations,
Here.
simply because they want to work in the profession they spent a decade training for.
Exactly. The report notes that these agencies actively criticize the migrants for holding on to their previous occupational status.
It's unbelievable.
The bureaucratic expectation is total submission to the immediate needs of the low-wage labor market. If a migrant refuses to sweep streets because they know a gap in their highly specialized resume filled with unrelated manual labor will completely derail any future chances of working in a laboratory or an engineering firm.
The system views that as a lack of cooperation.
Yes. They are accused of lacking realism and expecting the state to just hand them a perfect life.
It's a complete deflection mechanism. Let's examine who actually benefits from this narrative of individual blame. Why does the caseworker or the agency director lean into this idea that the migrant is just too stubborn?
because that narrative perfectly covers up institutional failure. It protects the status quo.
Yeah.
Think about the incentive structure from the perspective of municipal administration. It is infinitely cheaper, much faster, and requires far less administrative effort and creativity to simply blame the migrant for refusing a reasonable job offer than it is to fundamentally redesign the integration process.
Right, because designing a system that accurately evaluates a foreign degree, matches it to a specific language course, and partners with private industry for a mentorship program, that takes massive effort.
It takes budget, effort, structural change.
Yeah.
Exactly. If the migrant is fundamentally to blame, if they are just lazy or obstinate, then the agency doesn't have to change its protocols. The municipality doesn't have to fight for a larger budget for specialized integration courses.
And the state doesn't have to reform its degree recognition laws.
Right. The narrative of individual failure acts as a protective shield for a broken bureaucracy. The blame is entirely outsourced to the person who has the least power in the dynamic.
Okay, so their degrees are invalidated, and the welfare office is trying to force them into unskilled labor.
Yeah.
The next logical step for anyone trying to escape that trap and rebuild their professional standing is language acquisition.
Yes.
Language is always touted as the golden key to integration. People always say, well, if they just learned the language, everything would fall into place. How does the system handle this crucial step?
The study dedicates significant attention to this, specifically analyzing the state-sponsored language programs known as SGB Third courses.
SGB Third.
Right. SGB Third refers to Sozialgesetzbuch III, the third book of the German Social Code, which governs employment promotion and unemployment benefits. Under this framework, the state funds language courses for immigrants to facilitate their entry into the labor market.
Sounds great in theory. The state pays for you to learn German so you can work. What does the data show about the reality of these courses?
The reality is a structural mismatch that practically guarantees failure for the highly qualified. First, the standard duration of the SGB Third language course provided at the time was typically 6 months.
Just 6 months.
Yeah. And the researchers, along with linguistic experts, note that 6 months is widely considered far too short to achieve the complex level of fluency required to work in a highly specialized academic or technical profession in Germany.
I mean, obviously, you can maybe learn to navigate a supermarket or have a basic conversation in 6 months.
Exactly.
But you aren't going to be writing complex legal briefs or discussing structural load-bearing physics in German after half a year. But the length of the course isn't even the biggest problem the study found, is it?
No. The most glaring structural failure was the composition of the classrooms themselves. The agencies responsible for assigning individuals to these SGB Third courses often failed to conduct proper, differentiated placement tests based on educational background or learning capacity.
So who ends up in the room together?
The study found that highly educated academics, university professors, research scientists, medical doctors with decades of experience were routinely thrown into the exact same language classes alongside individuals who had virtually zero formal educational background.
Oh, wow.
And in some cases, individuals who were barely literate in their own native languages.
Let's break down why that is so disastrous from a pedagogical standpoint.
Well, it creates an unworkable dynamic for the instructor and the students. You have a situation where someone who understands complex grammatical structures, who is used to academic study, and who can memorize vocabulary at an intensive pace.
Is sitting next to someone who has never been taught how to study in a formalized setting?
Exactly. The teaching pace must inevitably cater to the lowest common denominator, or else half the class is entirely left behind.
And the study explicitly points out that in these uncritically mixed groups, teaching what is called Fachsprach technical or professional language is absolutely impassable.
Exactly. Fachsprach is the specialized vocabulary of a specific field. A civil engineer needs to know the German words for tensile strength, load distribution, zoning laws.
And a doctor needs highly specific anatomical and pharmacological vocabulary.
Right. But the instructor cannot teach the vocabulary needed for an engineering firm in a room where half the students are still struggling to learn the basic conjugations needed to ask for directions or buy a train ticket.
The participants themselves were acutely aware of this failure, weren't they? The study quotes an interviewee who made a very insightful observation. They said, "An academic stumbles over the German words just like someone who doesn't have this education," meaning, at day one, neither of them speaks German.
Right.
But the interviewee goes on to note that an academic learns the mechanics of the language entirely differently. They look for structural patterns.
Exactly.
So by forcing everyone into a one-size-fits-all model, the system fails the highly qualified by completely starving them of the intellectual challenge and specific tools they need, while simultaneously overwhelming and intimidating the less formally educated participants who feel they just can't keep up.
And we also have to look at how access to these courses is gatekept.
Gatekept.
Yes, the bureaucracy sometimes uses the language requirement not as a tool for integration, but as a weapon to maintain that immediate placement mandate we discussed earlier.
Oh, this part of the study truly highlights the friction. Give us an example of how this gatekeeping works.
The researchers document instances of actively harmful counseling by caseworkers. In one notable case, an applicant, a highly qualified professional, requested approval for a standard SGB III language course to improve his German for the job market.
Okay.
The caseworker flatly refused the application.
Why?
The justification given was, and I quote, "You won't get a language course. Your language is sufficient for a low-level job."
Oh my God. Think about the implication of that statement.
It's chilling.
The state representative explicitly tells a trained professional, "We are not going to invest in you learning enough German to work in your profession because you already know just enough German to sweep floors or stack boxes, and that is all we expect of you."
And that specific individual recognized this as a violation of his rights and actually had to hire a lawyer to enforce his legal entitlement to a 6-month language course.
Unbelievable.
It took another half a year of exhaustive legal battles just to get a positive decision from the agency.
Half a year of waiting. Unable to study, unable to work in his field, just fighting a legal battle. Did the agency explain why they fought him so hard?
Well, the agency's eventual excuse for the delay was that they, quote, "didn't know he was an academic and recognized engineer."
Really?
Yeah. However, the researchers reviewed the case and pointed out two things. First, the claim was factually false, as his qualifications were clearly documented in his file.
Of course they were.
Second, it was legally irrelevant anyway, since the right to the basic SGB III language course wasn't strictly tied to possessing an academic degree. The friction was entirely artificial.
It just shows how much energy is wasted fighting the system instead of integrating into the economy. And even if you manage to fight your way into a language course and you successfully complete it, you run into the next structural wall. The study talks extensively about the Vortezeiten, the waiting times or time gaps.
This touches on a critical lack of macroeconomic coordination. True integration is a continuous overlapping process. But the state bureaucracy handles it like a series of disconnected, isolated events managed by different non-communicating departments.
Right.
The study found massive, uncoordinated chronological gaps between the end of a language course and the beginning of any subsequent job training, internship, or orientation measure.
It's like building a bridge halfway across a river and then deciding to take a year off before building the second half. What happens to the language skills during these gaps?
They atrophy. One interviewee summarized the experience perfectly. They said, "We finished the language course in February. The assessment measure began in August. There is too much time in between. We have a hole that is too big."
6 months.
Yes. If you spend 6 months intensively cramming a new language, and then you're forced to sit at home for 6 to 8 months with no structured environment to use it, no professional setting to practice it, and no German colleagues to speak with, the skills rapidly degrade.
The knowledge literally evaporates. So the state pays for a 6-month course and then essentially guarantees that its own financial investment is wasted by failing to coordinate the very next step.
It represents a total lack of what the study calls integration support. There is no consistent, coordinated guidance. No single entity or caseworker is looking at the whole chessboard of a person's integration journey. It's just different municipal and state agencies playing hot potato with people's lives.
And the level of actual counseling provided to help navigate this maze is shocking.
The lack of consulting is indeed staggering. The migrants reported to the researchers that in both the labor offices, the Arbeitsamt, and the welfare offices, there was virtually no substantive counseling related to professional integration strategies.
None.
The conversations rarely went beyond administrative paperwork. Caseworkers consistently handed the responsibility entirely back to the migrant, offering platitudes like, "If you find something yourself, come back to us," or "Look for yourself, try to do as much as possible yourself."
Which is incredibly isolating. I mean, put yourself in their shoes. You are new to a country. The bureaucratic rules are an opaque maze. Your lifetime of professional degrees has been invalidated. You've been denied appropriate language training.
Mhm.
And the people whose literal job title implies they are there to help you integrate are just shrugging their shoulders and saying, figure it out.
And this profound isolation is compounded by unseen cultural frictions, which Gruber and Rusler also extensively documented.
All right, the cultural differences.
The barriers aren't just legal and bureaucratic, they're also deeply cultural, specifically regarding how one presents oneself in the labor market.
This is one of the most fascinating aspects of the study for me.
Yeah.
The social competencies of these highly qualified migrants versus the expectations of German human resources.
The researchers interviewed educational providers and potential employers who interacted with these migrants. Universally, they praised their social behavior.
Yeah.
The migrants were consistently described as open, cordial, highly educated in a broad cultural sense, and highly disciplined.
But there is a massive catch when it comes to navigating a Western, highly competitive job interview, right? The study identifies a phenomenon that actively sabotages them.
Yes. The study highlights a behavioral pattern we can call deep stacking, meaning these migrants tend to significantly understate their qualifications, knowledge, and achievements during job interviews.
Interesting. Why is that?
We have to look at their cultural background. In the Soviet professional environment they came from, overt self-promotion was often viewed negatively. Modesty, restraint, and respectfulness were paramount virtues.
So boasting was frowned upon.
Exactly. The cultural expectation was that your hard skills, your diplomas, and your work history would speak for themselves. You didn't need to boast. The paperwork proved your worth.
But the Western and specifically German corporate labor market operates on a completely different frequency.
Totally different.
Modern HR algorithms and interview processes expect you to aggressively sell yourself. You have to walk into a room and confidently declare why you are the absolute best person for the job, highlight your leadership skills, and project absolute certainty.
Exactly. German HR managers and employers noted in the study that these applicants consistently presented themselves far below their actual qualification level. They would use mitigating language, downplay their past leadership roles, and hesitate to make bold claims about their abilities.
The tragedy of miscommunication here is immense.
It really is.
A German employer sits across from a highly capable engineer who is being culturally modest. And the employer interprets this modesty not as politeness, but as a lack of confidence, a lack of drive, or even a lack of actual competence.
And without proper culturally aware counseling and interview training, which, as we've established, the system largely fails to provide, this cultural mismatch becomes another massive, invisible barrier to employment.
Yeah.
The migrant thinks they're being respectful and professional, while the HR manager thinks they are underqualified and timid.
And when the system does occasionally try to bridge the gap and create specific programs for this demographic, the results can be deeply problematic in a completely different way.
Yes.
The study spends significant time analyzing the Nadezhda project in Hattingen. Let's unpack that, because it perfectly illustrates the agonizing compromises these highly qualified people are forced to make just to find stability.
So the Nadezhda project was a specific retraining measure implemented with good intentions. The goal was to take unemployed migrants, specifically targeting the highly qualified Jewish quota refugees we've been discussing, and retrain them to become group leaders in specialized workshops for the disabled.
Now, on one hand, if you look at the immediate qualitative feedback, it seems like a success. The educational providers and the workshop managers noted how incredibly well-suited these individuals were for the role.
Right.
They brought immense patience, emotional sensitivity, and a calm, structured demeanor to the workshops. The disabled clients responded wonderfully to them, and the migrants themselves were relieved to finally have structured, meaningful work.
However, Gruber and Rusler raise a vital structural critique of this project. While it provided immediate job security and removed them from the welfare statistics, it explicitly relied on the participants accepting a massive, permanent professional downgrade.
It essentially formalized and institutionalized the de-skilling process.
Exactly. The researchers pose a critical question. Is this really a model that a highly industrialized economy should be replicating? Taking highly trained theoretical physicists, specialized chemists, and civil engineers, and funneling them permanently into social care roles.
Right.
While social care is vital work, it renders their decades of highly specialized, expensive scientific training entirely worthless.
The migrants take these deals because they are desperate. They want stability, they want to contribute to society, and they're exhausted from fighting the bureaucracy.
Yes, they just want peace.
But society as a whole loses out massively on their actual expertise. We have individuals who could be designing green energy grids or developing new pharmaceuticals, instead leading craft time in a workshop. It is a profound systemic misallocation of human capital masked as an integration success story.
And this brings us to one final, deeply entrenched systemic barrier that the study identifies:
What's that?
the age factor. The demographic data of these immigrants is crucial here. About 30% of the Jewish quota refugees arriving in this wave were between 45 and 65 years old.
In a society that is constantly panicking about demographic decline and an aging workforce, you would think bringing in mature, experienced professionals would be a priority. How does the system view them?
Well, the welfare agencies and labor offices often view this age bracket as a terminal deficit.
Sure, deficit.
Yes. The bureaucratic algorithm essentially sees age 50 and instantly classifies the individual as unemployable or too expensive to retrain.
Unbelievable.
The caseworkers assume these people are too old to adapt, too old to learn the language sufficiently, or simply not worth the financial investment of a retraining program because they only have 10 or 15 years left in the workforce.
So the system actively pushes them toward the margins, either trying to shuffle them into early retirement programs or permanently resigning them to the lowest tiers of unskilled physical labor where their age makes them highly vulnerable.
But Gruber and Rusler point out that this age group actually possesses something invaluable that a 25-year-old recent graduate does not: decades of high-level practical experience.
Exactly.
They've spent years in complex leadership roles. They know how to plan long-term projects, organize large teams, manage personnel crises, and navigate complex industrial challenges.
Did the researchers find any evidence that employers actually want these older workers, contradicting the bureaucracy's assumptions?
Yes, emphatically. The researchers interviewed a clinical director at a medical facility who explicitly stated that advanced age was absolutely not an objection to hiring foreign-trained medical professionals.
Really?
In fact, he actively preferred it.
Why? Why prefer the older candidates?
He noted that his current staff was skewed too young, lacking practical high-pressure experience. He stated that the older immigrant professionals brought much-needed oversight, a calm maturity in crisis situations, and an incredibly strong willingness to work hard to regain their professional footing.
That makes total sense.
They were highly motivated to prove themselves, but the tragedy is that the bureaucracy rarely connects these experienced individuals with the specific employers who value them because the bureaucracy's rigid internal logic stops at the date of birth on the file.
Wow. So let's pull all of these threads together. What are we actually looking at here? We are seeing a gauntlet of unrecognized degrees.
Yes.
We see a welfare office obsessed with short-term savings at the cost of long-term economic integration. We see fundamentally broken mixed-level language courses that fail to teach technical vocabulary. We see a complete lack of culturally aware interview training, leading to disastrous miscommunications. We see projects that institutionalize de-skilling, and we see blatant institutional ageism. We're looking at a massive interlocking system of structural barriers.
If we connect all of this empirical data to the broader concept of integration, the study by Gruber and Rusler proves definitively that integration is never and can never be purely an individual effort.
No, of course not.
It is a reciprocal process. You can have a demographic population with the highest possible drive, the most elite education, and a desperate, genuine willingness to work and contribute.
Right.
But they cannot integrate into a labor market if the structures of the host society are actively designed, whether through intentional policy or through accumulated bureaucratic inertia to block them. Structures either enable opportunities or they destroy them.
And in this case, the structures are actively destroying them. The system is taking green card level talent, running it through a bureaucratic meat grinder, turning it into unskilled labor, and then having the audacity to use narratives like stubbornness to justify the outcome.
The study concludes that there is a desperate need for a systematic, coordinated, long-term integration policy. A policy that starts early, accurately and fairly assesses the actual qualifications people bring with them, and builds upon those qualifications with targeted, specialized, high-level training.
Rather than ignoring them or trying to erase them.
Exactly. The current approach, which the researchers characterize as integration without planning, coordination, and counseling, is not just failing the migrants on a human level. It is fundamentally failing the German economy, which desperately needs the exact skills these people possess.
Which brings us to the core realization of this entire deep dive. We have looked at the data. We have examined the mechanical realities of the bureaucracy. We have seen the systemic traps.
We have.
If even the most highly qualified, the most eager to work, the most highly educated people are failing to find their footing in this system, is it really their fault?
No.
Or are we simply whitewashing a massive structural problem? Are we relying on an outdated, comforting narrative of individual blame because it is infinitely easier than doing the hard work of fixing our own institutions?
That's the real question.
Think back to the X-ray metaphor we started with. The system wants a simple diagnosis where the migrant is the broken bone. But the empirical reality is a landscape of profound institutional friction. And until we fix the machine taking the picture, we're going to keep throwing away the talent, the experience, and the potential that we so desperately need.
Absolutely.
That was a deep dive from EmpowerMigra. EmpowerMigra understanding begins with listening.